Welcome, classmates and Dr. Barton. This is our brief presentation on developmental learning theory. Our learning objectives. Define developmental learning theory and how it relates to your development as a clinician educator. Describe how each theorist's philosophy can apply to healthcare education. So, how does learning develop? Well, as our brain matures, so does our capacity to understand. We learn from our environment by watching, listening, and exploring. Then, blend many parts that interrelate in different ways and change with growth over time. We have biological processes that describe changes in our body, cognitive processes that are changing in one's thought, intelligence, problem solving, and language. Emotional processes reflect changes in an individual's relationships with other people, emotions, and personality. Pause for a moment. Think about how you learned to ride a bike, put together a desk, embraced someone in need, and wrote your college thesis. Developmental learning theory attempts to understand the nature and sources of growth in humans' cognitive, language, and social skills. However, many theorists propose that the nature or genetics and nurture or environment influences how the development of learning that occurs during maturation. Some theorists are neutral while others favor one versus the other. It all started with Freud, who believed that human psyche is made up of two basic drives, self-preservation and libido, and developed his 5 stages of human development based off basic sexual instincts. However, his theories were disregarded since they were lacking evidence. So then came John Piaget, who is known for his research in developmental psychology, and he began to study the reasoning process of children at various ages. From there, many others began to pursue theories in developmental learning, such as Erik Erikson, who looked at more of the emotional development, B.F. Skinner, who reinforced and punishment molds behavior, Lev Vygotsky, who believes development is primarily driven by language, social context, and adult guidance, John Dewey, who believes on a hands-on approach where students must interact with their environment in order to adapt and learn, and Lawrence Kohlenberg, who theory is based on morals, or what's right and what's wrong. Piaget believed that children were little scientists, trying to figure out the world. But in figuring out the world, children were characterized into stages by their intelligence. Piaget developed these 4 stages of cognitive development based on the human's age, which are sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete, and formal. These stages are dependent on both maturation and environmental factors. Thinking and learning are a process of interaction of the human and the environment. And humans construct knowledge based on intimate cognitive structure and experiences. As we continue our development into higher learning, Alexander Aston developed his student involvement theory. This refers to the quantity and quality of the physical and psychological energy that students invest in their college experience. This offers educators a tool for designing more effective learning environments, and the greater the student's involvement in college will amount to the student learning and personal development. This is more of a humanistic approach, where the student is in control and where the instructor guides and facilitates the student's education. This type of method could be useful in healthcare education, where the instructor helps facilitate the clinical reasoning and decision-making process.
Before we move to our next historian, I want to reiterate what Jerry has already explained. Developmental learning is a sequence, one step must take place before the next, as well as acquisition of learning is a balance of nurture and nature. As we move to our second theorist, there's actually a lot of commonalities between Piaget and him. So please be on the lookout for those commonalities as well as differences. Our second historian is John Dewey. John Dewey was ahead of his time. He thought that the human development was beyond instinct and behavior, that the mind is not in isolation or subjective, rather is social, interactive, and shaped by environment, both physical as well as cultural upbringing. Experience is important, not only for survival, but for growth. Learning doesn't just take place physically, interacting with the environment, but as well as social learning, which is the role of peers. Investigative learning is how does one problem solve when a conflict presents itself. Constructive learning, which is how one builds, design, and create with the hands. Artistic learning is creative expression and the use of imagination. The four stages for Dewey model are symbolic, outcome, reflective, intervene. And remember, one must take place before the next. Commonly in infancy, the first stage of learning is symbolic. Through social games, imagination, and environmental access, interest and impression develops for the individual. Once that accessibility is reached, they become goal-oriented. An outcome is a desire. The individual, often in childhood, starts to recognize and respond to changes. They change themselves or they change the environment in order to reach the desired outcome. Having reached stage 2 desired outcome, stage 3 reflective attention comes into play when they start think back of their past experiences and consider what works and what doesn't work. Relying on that retrogradative experience, they problem solve to reach the desired outcome. That is their drive for learning. The final stage of learning is intervene. No longer just stage 3, relying on reflective attention and past experiences. The individual can be self-directed and seek out, be in charge of their own learning. Look into what's interesting and ways to decrease conflict and barriers. So the 4 stages for Dewey's model is symbolic, outcome, reflective, and finally, intervene. I should note that these terminologies are not necessarily coined by John Dewey himself, but there are contemporary theorists that use it to explain John Dewey's developmental model. So, as we mentioned that stage 3 is reflective attention, so reflective learning is actually a pretty common approach of active learning, getting the individual to introspect and consider how they are in terms of maintaining meaningful information. Sang, in 2011, introduced reflective group discussion into a curriculum that already had reflective writing. While reflective writing allowed the individual to individually consider professional development, reflective group discussion was able to complement and enhance the undergraduate health students' experiences. The themes found included increased mindfulness of critical incidents because they had to consider what to share with peers and whether or not the sharing is impactful for learning. This developed their assessment, reasoning, and judgment to determine what is quality learning related and what is not quality learning related. Having multiple perspectives in the same place allows them to develop a perspective that is beyond themselves. This allows empowerment as well as collaboration. This is a publication that supports the use of reflective learning and also demonstrate how, from a developmental perspective, you move beyond stage 2, outcome driven, and enter stage 3 of learning where you use reflective attention. So, in summary, we hope that at the end of this screencast, you are able to explain what developmental learning theory is. We presented two historians, Piaget and John Dewey. We hope that you can explain and differentiate their models to developmental learning. Jerry and I have provided evidence on student involvement and the use of reflective learning. So moving forward, we hope you consider how you can incorporate reflective learning or maybe a different form of meaningful experience in health education to strengthen people's developmental approach to learning. Thank you. And these are our references.